Do you have me? All right. Manhattan and Brooklyn are both by Daniel Chester French. Manhattan has the treasure chest under her feet, symbolizing the financial center of the city. And there are also 3 boat bows in the statue, symbolizing the port and the activity of, at this point, immigration as well as commerce. Both Brooklyn and Manhattan were part of the Manhattan Bridge. Those of you who know New York know that it's just a little bit north of the Brooklyn Bridge. And it was built when this City Beautiful movement was very important. And they felt if you surrounded people with beautiful architecture and beautiful art, their behavior would rise to the occasion. That was the theory. I don't know how successful it was. But this is the Manhattan side of the bridge. Big colonnade and arch, big, Manhattan, nose in the air. On the Brooklyn side, there were these 2 columns, and they were kind of barren. And they felt guilty. All this class on one side of the bridge and not much on the other. And that's when they commissioned Daniel Chester French to sculpt the statues of Brooklyn and Manhattan. And they stayed there till 1961. And then, remember, this is Manhattan. All this space is prime space. You just can't waste the space. You have to tear it down for traffic. And the commissioner of the parks, Robert Moses, petitioned to have the statues demolished, saying that they were ornamental architectural masonry and they must yield to make way for reconstruction. Well, a month later, the commission grudgingly approved the removal of the statues, and they were at the last hour given a reprieve, and they're at the Brooklyn Museum. Now, I got to get this straight. Brooklyn is on the proper left. Now, this proper left was a new term to me as I began researching this. Proper left is the left of the building itself, or the left of the person itself, or the left of the statue itself. So, Brooklyn is on the proper left, here on the left of the building, and Manhattan is over here on the right. Manhattan gets the right of way. But now that we've met Brooklyn and Manhattan, 2 lovely, lovely sculptures, I'd like to move on down to Chambers Street. I have people who have offered to take me to New York to see this, but haven't come through with it yet. It's my son in the front row, needling him a little bit. This is the Surrogate Court building. It's across the street from City Plaza there, where City Hall is. It's a 7-story building. It was built, took 8 years to build it because of all kinds of things. One of which is that there are 54 sculptures in the building itself. And I love this building because it tells the history of New York City. And it starts with New York in its infancy. This is flanking the proper left entrance of the Surrogate Court building. Notice we have a central figure here. This is representing New York. She's wearing a crown to symbolize the royal rule, and she's flanked by an Indian and a Dutch settler. The first recorded Dutch exploration of New York Bay was in 1609, so we're going quite far back in history here. If we go up to the top of the building, at the 5th floor, there's a series of sculptures along here that tell us a good bit about the history of New York. David Peterson de Vries, he's got the baggy pants there, was a Dutch mariner and merchant, and he established colonies on Staten Island and also at Tappan, near the Tappan Zee Bridge. And both settlements were ravaged by Indians. He went home, back to Netherlands, and he spent his time writing a history of the New Netherlands. So that was his contribution. He early settler, but didn't stay. This is Peter Stuyvesant, the last Dutch Director General of the area. And in 1664, everything was calm and peaceful between the Netherlands and England, and everything was nicey-nicey until 4 English frigates came up and demanded the surrender of New Netherlands. And Peter Stuyvesant was the person that surrendered to the English. So he was the last Dutch leader. After there were hostilities back and forth, it was New Amsterdam, New York, New Orange, and eventually New York, and it stayed New York. The next person we see is Caleb Heathcote. He was mayor of New York from 1711 to 1714, and he was granted the last manor. Think back to the medieval times where you had Lord of the Manor. Well, at first the crown would grant manors in the New World, and he was the last person to be granted the manor, which is the land and the income from the land. So that was his contribution. Now, I'm just going time-wise, so we're dropping back to the New York in Revolutionary times. It's down by the entrance, and it's on the proper right. And here we have New York helmeted, ready for battle. And we have a British soldier and a colonial woman. So it tries to portray the time. Then we get James Duane. He was mayor from 1784 to 1789. He was the first mayor after the British left. So we've had the Dutch leave, we've had the British leave. He was the first mayor after the British left. And he was a delegate to the First and Second Continental Congress. DeWitt Clinton. Even I remember this from history. I'm not a historian. I just love the granite, and I love to see what the granite does. But I remember Clinton's big ditch. And, oh no, you can't see him?
It's much better without.
Okay, all right. No, I can see, but the film can't, but that's all right. No problem. So that was his contribution, was the Erie Canal, which made New York very important in the shipping, because before we had all these great interstate highways, the easiest way to move things was by boat. And here you could move stuff to the middle of the country by canal. Cadwallader David Colburn. Now this guy was the 54th mayor. We're now into the 1800s, 1818 to 1821. And he was very active in the militia during the War of 1812 and was a mayor of New York for 3 years. Philip Hone, a mayor of New York from 1825 to 1826, best known as a diarist. And from him we have a very good record of his doings. On Monday, April 6th, I don't have the year. I think it was the second year he was mayor. So this is probably 1826. This is the commencement of the second volume of my diary, which I began on the first day last May and have continued since with tolerable regularity. I have occasionally introduced matters of trifling importance and have omitted others which were entitled to a place. But the employment has afforded me some pleasure, and after its use shall have become more confirmed by long practice, I have no doubt it will be more agreeable and exceedingly useful. And we get many years of his activities. And, he goes to this ball, and this lady wasn't very well dressed sometimes. And then he goes to other things that he talks about, political accomplishments. Abram Stevens Hewitt, this is still on that one building, was mayor of New York from 1887 to 88. And that's just 11 years before this building was started. So that's almost contemporary to the building. And he did a lot of work in eradicating corruption in New York. And at that time, it was sort of like eradicating corruption in Rhode Island. It's tough. He did establish Cooper's Union, and he was an industrialist in the steel business. So he was a well-rounded man, but sought to have a city free from corruption. So we've seen a pretty good history of New York as we've gone through the different stages of settling and becoming independent. But New York gives us a much broader view of history, and I'm going to try, it's going to be approximate chronological order as I take you on a tour of Manhattan, the Bronx, Queens, Brooklyn, and Staten Island. I'm going to start with William Shakespeare. Now, he's not American, but he has given us so much as a cornerstone of our English literature. And so his statue is in Central Park. And notice this polished red Westerly granite. If you saw the urn in the other room that's polished red Westerly granite, that's the same granite that's here. The statue is bronze. And it's on the Mall. Now, it's on the Mall right down here. And most of our statues in Central Park are on the south end, so we could go for a walk there too. Our next person chronologically is Alexander Hamilton. We all know him from American history class. He was our nation's first Secretary of the Treasury, and he died in a duel with Aaron Burr. But I did not know that he was Washington's aide-de-camp during the war, and he was very frustrated with paper pushing. And he said, I got to get out of this. And he did. He did get a field command and did a dramatic leadership in charging the British fortifications at Yorktown. So I did not know that he was. Now, our next person is Richard Robert Randall. Ever heard of Snug Harbor? I never knew what it was. This man was quite a philanthropist, and in his will, he turned his property over to what would be called Sailors' Snug Harbor. This Snug Harbor was meant to be a marine hospital for the purpose of maintaining aged, decrepit, and worn-out sailors. But, they didn't have Social Security in those days. You worked until you dropped. And in a job as difficult as sailing, they needed a place where the older people could just rest. Obviously, it's the pedestal that is Westerly Granite. This statue has been removed to North Carolina, and a replica has been placed here because the hospital, the Snug Harbor, has moved to North Carolina. I don't know why. I seriously doubt that they changed the pedestal. I'm sure they put North Carolina granite under the statue, but I'm not sure of that. And that's on right up here on the north shore of Staten Island. And his dates, he died in 1801. So this was pretty radical thought that he had at that stage. This is the only monument we'll see tonight that is actually marking the grave of a person. This marks the grave of General William Jenkins Worth, who was in both the War of 1812 and the Mexican War. I looked up all these dates. Man, I was doing my history. I got 2 history teachers in here, so I'm on. Woo. After Worth died, he was temporarily interred at Greenwood Cemetery in Brooklyn, and eventually he was moved to the monument's location at the intersection of 5th Avenue, Broadway, and 25th Street, which is right there in Manhattan. It was a huge ceremony when they dedicated this monument. The procession included 6,500 soldiers. It was a big deal. So if you are in New York, check it out. Moving along chronologically, we get to early 1800s, and Alexander von Humboldt was a physical geologist and meteorologist. He was the first guy to come up with isotherms and take the temperature in various places and then put temperature lines on maps. He's considered to be the founder of modern geography, and he is in Central Park at West 77th Street. So he is up here. I don't know how far it is walking these distances. It looks easy on a map. I don't know. Our next person is a poet. Now, have you noticed we've had generals, we've had poets, we've had a philanthropist, we've had a scientist. This is Fitz Greene Halleck, and he was a poet very popular in his era, this romantic verse. And his best known poetry was Marco Bozzaris, and it is really, and kids used to have to memorize it for school. And it talks about, in the beginning of the 1800s, Greece was trying to assert its independence from Turkey. They've been fighting out in that part of the country forever. And it talks about the valiant death of both soldiers, and it's very, very sappy poetry. But this was a big deal when this was dedicated. The dedication was attended by President Rutherford and his entire cabinet. So it was a big deal. An inventor, Sam Morse, he's in Central Park. The pedestal is Westerly Granite. It might be Quincy. I get different opinions in different sources, but until I'm sure and go see it myself, I'll say we might have it. And of course, he's famous for the telegraph. And he was also a painter. I didn't know he was a painter as well. This is one of our favorites, the Bethesda Fountain in Central Park. The part that's Westerly Granite is this part right here, and it's a big hexagonal stone. It's huge, and this whole fountain was made in honor of the Croton water system, which first brought fresh water into New York. And on the top of the monument are the angel of the waters, going back to the Gospel of John, where the angel blesses the pool of Bethesda and giving it healing powers. And the cherubim right in here represent health, purity, temperance, and peace. But I have to read you a little bit from the New York Evening Post on October 10th, 1872. The great fountain in Central Park. The basin was constructed by Mr. J.G. Batterson of Hartford, Connecticut, also New England Granite Works here on Leadwood Avenue. The single stone from his quarry in Westerly weighed in the rough 60 tons, and in the basin as it sets now weighs 28 tons. In the past 8 years, Mr. Batterson has made 3 attempts to get this stone, the first 2 proving scant in dimensions and otherwise defective. In hauling the third out of the quarry, chains with wrought links of 2-inch iron snapped like twine. These were some of the risks in getting this basin to Central Park, where within a few days it has been safely placed in position. So it was quite an achievement in those days, testing the limits of even J.G. Batterson, and he was a guy used to doing big stuff.
Where is that one in the park?
That's at the end of the mall. If you go up the mall, it leads you right to the park. It's right here. It's that star there.
Oh, right there.
We even have Italian patriots. We've had Dutch, we've had British, now we've got Italian here. This is America. You know, it's a melting pot. Giuseppe Mazzini was very active in the mid-19th century in Italian politics as they tried to unify the nation. And, you know, Brenda and I were talking, where does the money come for these? You know, Alexander Hamilton, well, you can figure people would do that. But somebody had to think enough of Giuseppe Mazzini to give money for a very elaborate piece of stone. It's 14.1 feet high, 14 feet 1 inches high. And the base is 3 foot 10 by 3 foot 10, so it's a big hunk of stone. Now here is a monument to a mediocre general. He really didn't do much in the Civil War. But after the war, he was in the militia, like the National Guard, and he was so well thought of by his people that upon his death, they erected this monument. And this is the one that's in the Bronx. It's way up here in the Bronx. So we got all the bases covered now. Now this one is in Queens, and it's the soldier of the Civil War. Now we've honored generals, and now we're honoring the regular workaday soldier, the guy in the trenches. And this is a Westerly Granite base and pedestal with a bronze statue. Grant's tomb is not made of Westerly granite. But J.G. Batterson, the Batterson who had his fingers in every pie and was very talented, I don't mean that disparagingly, he had a lot of good contacts. When they went to put the sarcophagi in the building, they called him in for advice. So he mentioned that in his obituary. So if he mentions it in his obituary, I should tell you about it. So no one is buried in Grant's tomb because both Grant and his wife are entombed in the sarcophagi above ground in the building there. And he was president from 1869 to 77, and my cousin somehow, I don't know how many times removed. I was going to look that up. Now here's an interesting one. This is a red polished Westerly granite tablet very close to the Grant's tomb, and Brenda asked me, well, why did they do this? And so I get on the internet and I start looking. Grant had gone to China and he had met Li Hongchang there, and they got along very well. They have a photograph of the two of them together. It's really quite a photograph. And they respected each other. They had personal regard for each other. And Grant was trying to get the Chinese to open up, to become more a part of the world economy. We've been dealing with this issue for a long time. But you see, Westerly granite has these little tangents on history as well. This is one of the most lovely memorials. It's in Central Park It's right down here. It's an exedra, which is a curved bench. It's all out of Westerly granite. And you can see these are red granite polished columns and blue Westerly granite exedra. The sculptor was Daniel Chester French again. On one side, on this side, is painting and sculpture. And she's holding in her left hand a palette and a small model of the handless, footless Dionysus taken from the east pediment of the Parthenon. In her right hand, there's a sculptor's mallet. This one over here is architecture, and she holds one of Hunt's most famous works, the administration building from the 1893 World's Fair. He was a wonderful architect. He did a lot of our Newport cottages, like the Breakers and all of those. So he was a very famous architect. And in the center is his bust. Have a journalist, a muckraker. He tried to make people aware of the difficult situations the poor had in New York City. And, you know, this was a time when the rich were very, very rich and the poor were very, very poor. And he did a lot. Now his monument is at Rockaway Beach, and during Sandy it was all messed up and these kids redid it. Once his bust was stolen. People like to steal bronze because it has value as scrap metal. It's very, very sad when they do that. And it was stolen in 1964, and it was replaced in 2010 through the efforts of students of the Aquinas Honor Society of the Immaculate Conception School of Jamaica Estates, New York. The kids did it. God bless them, you know. This is a Spanish-American war hero, and it's in the Queens. And this was the son of a prominent family in Jamaica, Long Island, and he was on the island of Panay and was charged with the job of repairing a telegraph cable. And he didn't take the advice to go in civilian clothes. They saw the group, they got shot, he was shot. All of the rest of his group made it back safely, but he died at that incident. This is John Kaduri's favorite New York monument. This is in Times Square. It was cut by the Joseph Kaduri Company in 1937, and it honors Father Duffy. Father Duffy was a chaplain in both the Spanish-American War and in World War I. He also had a ministry with those in and around Times Square. So in the middle of all this crowds and chaos, Westerly Granite is there. We have an educator, a school principal, and this is a water fountain that was dedicated to him. It's on Staten Island, and this is one that you've probably walked by. It's down at Battery Park, and it's the Marine Wireless Operators Monument. Honored the people who were wireless operators, these men who died in storms. World War I heroes, the Bushwick Ridgewood Boys, just the neighborhood boys. This is in Brooklyn. This is the Dover Patrol Monument. There's a similar one in England and one in France. And it was funded by public subscriptions in Great Britain in appreciation for the aid of the United States in World War I. It's at Fort John Paul Jones Park, right next to the Verrazano Narrows Bridge in Brooklyn. And this is, again, World War I heroes on Staten Island. And this is our last guy. He died in 1926. He was a local politician and did a lot of public works projects when he was borough president. He used to have a bronze bust there. It got stolen. It was replaced with an urn made out of granite. Did you notice the scope? We had military heroes from colonial conflicts, Revolutionary War, War of 1812, Mexican War, Civil War, Spanish-American War, and World War I. We have a dramatist, a philanthropist, a scientist, a politician, poets, inventor. The infrastructure itself with the Bethesda Fountain. Patriots in exile, a former president, a foreign diplomat, an architect, a journalist, a wireless operator, and educators. It's pretty amazing that Westerly Granite has carved in stone this history of our country. Thank you for coming, and I'll answer whatever questions I can. And
Linda, probably a tough question. Have we ever compared, or do you know, the cost of bronze statuary versus granite for a comparable statue?
no, I don't.
I mean, I wonder if it's just
I don't know.
a preference, a style, or if it was a cost issue.
I think it's easier to cast a bronze statue than it is to get a craftsman that can carve the granite, because not only do you have to have it sculpted, then you have to add model, and then you have to get the granite. With casting, you sculpt it, you get the cast, and you're ready to go. Yes?
I just keep thinking about the sheer weight of that basin. Because I found, how did they get it on here today? Any idea? Ship? I mean,
Probably, by barge, probably. It's probably too big for railroad, because it's one piece, so I would imagine it went by barge.
it was a jiggle to crack it. But I didn't get on.
Yes.
I just want to mention that you're clearing land near our house in Pawnee, and we ran into two huge stones, they're solid granite,
Oh, yeah?
and they're so big that they can't move them. One of them he tried to drill and chop at for 2 days, and he got a third of it chipped away, and he got it lifted out and moved to the corner of the property because they don't know what to do with it. It probably weighs about 50 tons.
Wow.
It's like
Where is this? Where is this?
2 feet diameter rock.
Wow.
And there were two of them, and one of them they were able to just move aside because they were going to build over it, but the other one they wanted for foundation.
Yeah.
So they had to get it out of the hole.
Wow.
They were working with a big backhoe for 2 days just to move things around.
Whoa. Glad it was them and not me.
It's pretty amazing, and it's solid granite. We
Yeah.
went and looked at it.
Yeah. Now, where is this?
It's on it's in the East Beach area. It's on the Upper Highland Road.
Uh-huh.
And I guess the glaciers or something must have put them there.
I don't know anything about it, but that's interesting.
Yeah, but they're boulders, they're not cut.
Right, they're just
They're not quartz.
granite boulders.
Are they boulders? Are they like round or? Well, they probably came with the glacier.
Yeah.
We got an awful lot of boulders around here from the glacier. My whole yard is a glacier dump. I can't even put up a bird feeder without hitting rocks.
Of the monuments presented tonight, which would you personally consider the most at risk?
At risk for
From
what?
Damage, accident? The one I was thinking of was the one in the traffic circle.
There's a lot of these World War I era monuments that are on little triangles in Brooklyn or Queens. And I would imagine that they're pretty much more at risk than those in Central Park or at the museum. But now, I just showed you the stuff that talked about history. Westerly Granite does everything from skyscrapers to sewage treatment plants, from statues like Manhattan and Brooklyn to mile markers. So it's quite a scope that we go to. And I hope you noticed that scope when we talked. The years from Shakespeare to 1926. All over, if you look at the dots around there, you can see where Westerly Granite is on the map. All over the city, from the top of the Bronx to the foot of Manhattan.
Has it been shipped outside the United States?
Yes. Brenda is working on one in Canada. We have one in Scotland, at least one, if not more, in Scotland. And she wants to take it as a tax-deductible trip, but I'm telling her.
Take it to Caribbean, that one I'll know.
But
Is the Scots because of the part that they played here in the Granite?
I'm sorry?
And is the one in Scotland related to the role that the Scots played
There was
in Granite?
a relationship between the Newell Company and the Newell Company in Scotland, and there's a monument in the middle of the town square. It's part of a water fountain, and a lady sent me a digital copy of the picture back and forth. So it's kind of fun as we track down these things. Other questions?
We know that the Kuduri Company did the Duffy and Batson did the fountain on the rest, Smith.
Kaduri did Duffy, and Batterson did what?
The fountain on the rest, Smith,
No, we don't know who they are.
or you don't know.
The way you know how sometimes you're just bumbling along and you strike pure gold? I was looking around and I found an error on the website for the park system in New York. So I called to tell them that there was an error. You know, they said two different things, which one was correct? And it was not Westerly Granite that was correct, but that was unfortunate. But I was talking to the lady there, and she says, oh, I have a database. She's the one that turned me on to the surrogate court. She says, oh, have you looked at the surrogate court? I didn't know what the surrogate court was. So she said, we got 37 Westerly Granite statues down there. I says, oh, do you have this in a database? She says, oh, yes, I'll send it to you. So she sent me her database of monuments made out of Westerly Granite. So that's how we know that they're Westerly Granite. And some of them,
Weren't there log books from the
now
actual, aren't there, books for the...
we have granite books for the Smith Granite Company and some of the books for the New England Granite Works, Batterson. But we think there was another set of books in Hartford which had the big stuff in it, like the Antietam Soldier and like this. Yeah. So we don't have a complete record, and none of the small companies, I was talking to one person here in the audience, if you know of anybody with granite roots in Westerly that has records that would like to donate them to the museum, we would gladly take them. If they would let us copy them, that would be wonderful also, because this is how we're putting all the pieces together. And you just keep futzing along, and sometimes you hit a day where she says, oh, I'll send you my database. And that was a good day. Yes?
Manhattan had a person with no head and no limbs on the side of her.
Yeah.
Was that damage or was that intentional?
That's supposed to be an artistic torso or something like that for the museums in Manhattan. Yes? Well, it was a love-hate relationship. There were two major big companies, the Smith Granite Company and the New England Granite Works. And the Smith Granite Company was right here on Granite Street where the shopping center is now. And New England was up by the water towers on Leadwood Avenue. And they competed, but Smith specialized more in memorials for people that died, cemetery monuments. New England did a lot of big stuff. They're the ones that did the skyscraper, the Bankers Trust in New York. They did all the granite in that building. They did the big Civil War monuments in Providence, in Worcester, these big, Lancaster, big, big, big. Smith did many, many more monuments, but they were more modest. Not that they were not well done, they were just smaller in scale. And the men who worked, the highly skilled carvers and statue cutters, would work for Smith when Smith had work, and they would work for New England when New England had work, and they would kind of go back and forth where the jobs were. Am I correct? All right. I have to check with my... There were many, many... What do we find, Ellen? How many companies? Almost 100, weren't there?
100 companies associated with the granite industry here in Westerly, and they're still growing up. We find ads for them in granite newsletters or journals, or we say, do we have that one? Do we have that one?
And it could be a one-man operation. He had a big boulder out in the backyard, and he whacked it off, and he cut stone, and he sold it. Smith and New England had about 400 at their peak. So there are 800 people working in the granite industry on this hill in peak times.
And Sullivan was cutting granite. They were not carving, but they were
Quarrying. They were quarrying granite.
They were supplying a lot of the raw material.
Buy our book. We got a great book. You'll love it, right? Yes, you'll love it. Buy the book. It's a great story. Anything else?
Isn't there the movie, isn't the movie on, PBS?
We have a PBS DVD that's also available. The book has more details. The DVD is more entertaining. Pay a nickel, take your choice. Well, more than a nickel. Yes, Karen.
Are you going to, at some point, do a program on the buildings themselves rather than the artistic side of it? The ones that, like,
She did it last year.
oh, you did?
It's on your website?
I don't know. Our taping is sporadic. We're not very good at this, but we try. I think the next one I want to do is going to be called Frosting on the Cake. And it's going to look at the absolute jewels from all over, cemeteries all over the country, and just look at how incredible our workmen were. If you look in the corner of the finished product over there, there's one of the Berwyn statue, and they made the granite see-through. I don't know how they did that. The illusion is that this lady has a see-through dress on. I don't know how you do that. But look at it. Some of our neat products are in there. Thank you for coming. It was fun talking with you.